Taehyung took you to Seoul first, where you both stayed at his friend's apartment. It was your first time in Seoul, and it felt so different from Busan. Every day, Taehyung took you out to explore the city, and you loved every moment of it. Neither of you talked about the past. Taehyung took care of all the formalities for you. He applied for a new ID card, replacing your father's name with your husband's. He even helped you get your first passport and applied for a spouse visa for New York. All of this took around 6 weeks. Luckily, Taehyung's boss understood the situation and let him stay by your side. Those 6 weeks were some of the best times of your life. You went to the cinema for the first time, and it was an amazing experience. Taehyung bought you the latest phone. You both went to the mall together, and for the first time in your life, someone asked about your preferences. Your stepmother used to take you to the local market, but she would always pick whatever she liked for you. Taehyung was different. He let you choose. He was a soft-hearted man, and as time passed, you realized that just as you longed for love, so did he. And slowly, you started liking him. His smile was the cutest, and his cooking skills were impressive too. Well, whoever woke up first would make breakfast. Sometimes, these little things made you cry. You remembered how you used to cook for yourself, and if you got hurt, nobody cared. But now things were different. One time, you cut your finger while cooking, and Taehyung gave you a long lecture, scolding you for being careless. You cried so hard that it made him worry, thinking you were in a lot of pain. As for his family, his sister's wedding had somehow taken place, but neither of you knew the details. Mrs. Kim and Suho tried everything to reach Taehyung, but he blocked them from everywhere. After all, Suho was good for nothing. So Mrs. Kim was missing Taehyung. 2 months later. Living in New York wasn't easy for you, especially because of the language barrier. Your English wasn't great, but Taehyung was fluent, so you relied on him for a lot of things. The rule remained the same: whoever woke up first would make breakfast, while you took charge of dinner. On weekends, though, you both cooked together. Right now, you were craving cake so badly, but you hesitated to ask. Even though you knew Taehyung wouldn't mind, you still felt embarrassed. As you prepared dinner, you pouted, thinking about it. Taehyung was running late today. He had already texted that the meeting was going long. You picked up your phone and took a deep breath. Y/N, it's okay. He's your husband, and it's just a cake, phew, so. Just then, the doorbell rang. Y/N, who is it? Taehyung, your handsome husband. You smiled and opened the door. Taehyung walked in and hugged you, and you hugged him back. Breaking the hug, he handed you a couple of bags, making you frown. Y/N, what's this? Taehyung, ignoring your question, is dinner ready? Y/N, yes, but is Taehyung, I'll explain everything later, but first, let me eat something. I'm starving. You smiled and nodded, setting the table while Taehyung went to freshen up. Once he returned, you both sat down for dinner. Later in the bedroom. Both of you were lying in bed, ready to sleep. Taehyung, Y/N. Y/N. Taehyung, I was thinking, maybe you should take an English course. Y/N, surprised, huh? Taehyung.
Yeah.
Now that this is our life, you should know how to speak English. I'll find a course and get you enrolled if you're okay with it. Y/N, I'm fine with it. I'll learn English. Taehyung, that's great. Once you get better at it, I'll get you enrolled in an undergraduate program. Y/N, eyes wide, really? You had always loved studying, Taehyung, MHM. By the way, what do you want to be in the future? A doctor? Lawyer? Teacher? Y/N, a software developer. Taehyung looked at you, a bit surprised. Y/N, what? Taehyung, teasing, is that why you married me? Y/N, what do you mean? Taehyung, a software developer. You both laughed, and Taehyung smiled at you warmly. You stayed up talking, enjoying each other's company, until sleep finally claimed you both. 6 years later. You were now a software developer, while Taehyung had been promoted to CEO. Life had become both convenient and joyful, especially with your little fluff ball, Taewoo, who was just 8 months old but already quite mischievous. Taehyung, as always, was the best husband anyone could ask for, supportive, loving, and caring. It was a beautiful morning at the Kim household. Taehyung, Achu. Taewoo giggled in response, his laughter filling the living room. Taehyung, Aeku. Taewoo burst into even louder giggles, thoroughly entertained by his dad's exaggerated sneezes. You stood watching the adorable scene while the maid prepared breakfast, enjoying the sight of your two favorite people. Y/N, who would believe you're a CEO? Taehyung frowned in mock offense. Taehyung, excuse me, madam. CEOs have small hearts too, you know. We can laugh. You laughed, and Taewoo, not understanding but sensing the joy, giggled as well. Taehyung, with fake anger, oh, so you're laughing at your data, huh? Taewoo giggled even more, making Taehyung smile. Just then, Taehyung's phone rang. Y/N, give him to me. Taehyung, no, thank you. He said, holding Taewoo closer while answering the call. Hey, Jimin. He greeted cheerfully. However, Jimin's voice on the other end was serious. Jimin, Taehyung, there's a problem. Taehyung's playful expression dropped as he passed Taewoo to you and became serious. Taehyung, what happened? Jimin, the doctors have given up. They said we should bring your mom home, she doesn't have much time. Taehyung fell silent, the weight of Jimin's words sinking in. You noticed the shift and gently placed your hand on his, while Taewoo wiggled in your lap, unaware of the tension. Y/N, Tae, what's wrong? Taehyung, quietly, I'll book the flight. I'm coming. Jimin, I'll wait for you. Taehyung ended the call, lost in thought. You waited for him to speak. Taehyung, do you want to come to Busan? Y/N, is she okay? Taehyung shook his head, his eyes filled with sadness. Y/N, I'll come. I think she should see Taewoo at least once. Taehyung nodded in agreement. While they packed. Suho, Taehyung's younger brother, had run away with a woman years ago and never returned. Mrs. Kim had lived alone ever since, with Jihoo visiting only rarely due to her strict in-laws. Despite the strained relationship, Taehyung had always sent money to his mother out of duty, though he barely spoke to her. He would pick up her calls maybe once a month, if that. A few days ago, Mrs. Kim had called, saying she felt very ill. Her local doctor had advised her to go to Seoul for proper treatment, so Taehyung had asked Jimin for help. Now, it seemed the situation was much worse. The next day. You both stepped off the plane in Busan, the city filled with memories, both good and bad. Taewoo clung to you, unaware of the heavy emotions hanging in the air as Taehyung prepared to face his mother, perhaps for the last time. As the car pulled up in front of Taehyung's childhood home, a wave of emotion washed over you both. The house was a reminder of old wounds, a place filled with memories of a strained relationship. Taehyung glanced at you, seeking reassurance, and you squeezed his hand gently. With Taewoo in your arms, the three of you stepped inside. Mrs. Kim lay on the bed, frail and weak, her breathing labored. Her once strong and commanding presence had diminished to a shadow of its former self. She looked up as you entered, her eyes filling with tears as they landed on Taehyung, then on you and Taewoo. Mrs. Kim, her voice cracking, I'm so sorry, for everything. Her tears fell freely now, a lifetime of regret spilling out with each sob. She reached out weakly toward Taehyung, her hands trembling. Mrs. Kim, I was wrong. I hurt you both. Please, forgive me. Taehyung stood still for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he knelt beside her bed, taking her hand in his. Taehyung, we forgive you, mother. You nodded, standing beside him, offering the same forgiveness. The weight of her guilt seemed to lift, her tears slowing as a sense of peace began to wash over her. She turned her head toward Taewoo, her eyes softening at the sight of the child she had never truly known. Mrs. Kim, whispering, I'm sorry, little one, for everything. Taewoo, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, cooed softly, reaching out toward his grandmother's hand. Mrs. Kim smiled faintly, tears still glistening in her eyes. With one final sigh, she closed her eyes and drifted away, resting in peace. At the funeral. The air was heavy with grief, but there was also a sense of closure. Mrs. Kim's funeral was a quiet affair, attended by only close family and friends. As the final prayers were said, you noticed Ji-hoo approaching, her face a mixture of guilt and sorrow. She hesitated before speaking, her voice trembling. Ji-hoo, I'm so sorry for everything. For how I treated you both. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it. You and Taehyung exchanged a look, silently agreeing on your response. Taehyung stepped forward. Taehyung, we've forgiven you, Ji-hoo. We've moved on with our lives. It's all in the past. We don't hold any grudges. Ji-hoo's face crumpled as the relief washed over her. Tears filled her eyes, and she gave a small nod of gratitude. With that, the burden of guilt that had weighed on her for so long was lifted. After the burial. As you and Taehyung walked back to the car, you found yourself glancing at the familiar footpath near the cemetery. It was the very same one where you had once lived, struggling to survive. Memories of those difficult days flooded back, the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. But now, things were different. You had moved on and built a life full of love and happiness. As the car slowly approached the path, something caught your eye. A figure sitting hunched over, dressed in tattered clothes, begging. You squinted, and your heart skipped a beat as you recognized her, your stepmother. She looked far older than you remembered, her once proud face now gaunt and weathered. You, softly, stop the car. Taehyung did as you asked, and you stepped out. As you approached her, your stepmother looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. For a moment, neither of you spoke. She was a shadow of the woman you once knew, now broken, begging for survival. Stepmother, in a hoarse voice, Y/N. She looked at you with pleading eyes, expecting sympathy, but you felt nothing. No pity, no sorrow, not even anger, just emptiness. Karma had done its work. You had heard through whispers that after your father's death, her 2 sons had taken over your father's shop and thrown her out. And here she was, abandoned and destitute, the same way she had left you so many years ago. Your stepmother waited, hoping for a kind word, but you simply stood there, silent. You looked down at her, remembering all the pain she had caused, the suffering she had inflicted. Yet strangely, you didn't feel any sympathy. Without a word, you turned and walked back to the car, your heart steady. Taehyung gave you a questioning look as he only met your parent once that to 7 years ago, but you shook your head. Let's go home. As the car pulled away, you glanced once more at the footpath where she sat, knowing that you had finally closed that chapter of your life. No longer weighed down by the past, you were free to live in the present, your best life with Taehyung and Taewoo by your side. As the plane touched down in New York, the familiar skyline greeted you both like an old friend. The weight of the past few days began to lift, and a sense of peace settled over you. Taehyung squeezed your hand, offering a reassuring smile, and you looked down at Taewoo, peacefully asleep in your arms. Returning to your bustling lives as a software developer and CEO, the world felt lighter. You resumed the rhythm of your everyday routines, grateful for the life you had built together, full of love, laughter, and new beginnings. The memories of Busan, once heavy with pain, now felt like a distant chapter you had finally closed. With Taehyung by your side and Taewoo growing up fast, New York was no longer just a city, it was home, a place where the past couldn't touch you, and the future was full of promise. Life had moved on, and so had you, ready to embrace whatever came next, hand in hand.